12 FBI agents with tactical gear surrounded my neighbor's house at 6 a.m. because I demolished my pool. Stephanie Crawford had filed so many noise complaints about my construction that she accidentally triggered a federal investigation into the cybercrime operation she'd been running from her basement. My name is Nathan Cross, and I work in federal cybersecurity for the Department of Homeland Security. 3 weeks ago, I was just a guy trying to remove his pool without HOA drama. But when Stephanie decided to weaponize every city ordinance against my project, her digital fingerprints connected her to a case I'd been investigating. Because while she was filing complaint after complaint about my excessive noise, she had no idea that every electronic submission was being logged by the same federal monitoring system tracking a multi-million-dollar identity theft ring. And I was the agent assigned to catch them. We've all had those HOA presidents who seem to have way too much time to police everyone else's business, right? The ones who know exactly what ordinance to quote and which authority to call. As this story unfolds, you'll probably start wondering how some people seem to have unlimited time for neighborhood enforcement. What happened next will make you want to check who's really running your community. 4 months ago, I made the decision to convert my backyard pool into a secure home office space. Working as a cybersecurity analyst for the Department of Homeland Security requires a level of digital privacy that's impossible to maintain in a traditional office environment. My current assignment involved tracking sophisticated identity theft operations that had stolen over $3 million from victims across 17 states. The pool had been the previous owner's pride and joy. But for someone who spends 12 hours a day analyzing encrypted data streams and monitoring federal cybercrime databases, it was just an expensive liability. The monthly maintenance costs were manageable, but the real issue was the lack of secure workspace for classified materials. I pulled the proper demolition permits from the city, hired a licensed contractor who specialized in pool removal, and scheduled the work to begin during standard construction hours. Having worked with federal security protocols for 8 years, I knew exactly how to minimize disruption while maintaining the operational security my work required. That's when Stephanie Crawford entered my life like a digital virus designed to corrupt everything it touched. She appeared at my property line on the first morning of demolition, carrying what appeared to be a tablet loaded with municipal ordinances and a demeanor that suggested she'd been preparing for this confrontation for weeks. Stephanie was the type of authority figure who commanded respect through comprehensive preparation rather than loud demands. Mr. Cross, I'm Stephanie Crawford, HOA President and Community Standards Coordinator, she announced, positioning herself to monitor my contractor's activities. I've received preliminary reports about unauthorized excavation that may violate multiple residential ordinances. Stephanie had the bearing of someone with extensive administrative background, referencing specific city codes and environmental regulations with the precision of a former government employee. What struck me as immediately suspicious was her surprisingly detailed knowledge of municipal databases that weren't accessible to general public. I understand you have concerns about the construction, I replied, but I have all required permits and we're operating within legal hours using licensed contractors. She consulted her tablet and frowned with practiced authority. Mr. Cross, proper residential demolition requires coordination with community management to ensure compliance with architectural standards and environmental protection protocols. I looked at her documentation, noting that her complaint references included city database numbers that required administrative access to obtain. Either she had connections within municipal government, or she was accessing systems she shouldn't have been able to reach. Stefania, I'm curious about these database reference numbers. How did you obtain internal municipal tracking codes for my permit application? Her confident expression flickered with something I'd learned to recognize during federal investigations. The micro-expression of someone caught accessing information they weren't supposed to have. Community management requires thorough oversight of all residential modifications. She deflected. I maintain professional relationships with appropriate municipal authorities to ensure neighborhood standards. But professional relationships don't typically provide access to internal database tracking systems. My cybersecurity training had taught me to recognize when someone was using unauthorized access to obtain restricted information. Over the next week, Stephanie's enforcement campaign escalated with the systematic precision of a well-planned cyber attack. She filed noise complaints during legal construction hours, documented violations for activities that fell within permitted parameters, and submitted reports with technical specifications that suggested access to engineering databases. Each complaint contained precise timing information, decibel measurements, and equipment serial numbers that weren't visible from her property line. Someone was conducting surveillance with professional-grade monitoring equipment and cross-referencing the data with restricted municipal systems. The pattern triggered my professional paranoia in ways that had nothing to do with neighborhood disputes and everything to do with potential security threats. I decided to apply the same analytical methodology I used for federal cybercrime investigations to understand exactly who I was dealing with, using resources available through my DHS clearance. I began building a comprehensive profile of Stephanie Crawford's digital footprint and background verification. What I discovered challenged every assumption I'd made about suburban HOA politics. Stephanie's claimed employment history as a retired real estate consultant couldn't be verified through any legitimate professional databases. Her consulting company existed only as a business registration with no client records, tax filings, or industry certifications. For someone claiming 30 years in real estate, she'd left remarkably few professional traces. More concerning was her financial profile. Property records showed she'd purchased her $450,000 house with cash 3 years ago. Despite having no verifiable income source that could support that level of wealth accumulation, her utility accounts, credit applications, and municipal registrations all showed recent establishment dates that coincided with her move to our neighborhood. That's when I cross-referenced her address with the federal databases I had access to through my cybersecurity work. Stephanie Crawford's residential IP address had been flagged in an ongoing identity theft investigation I'd been contributing to for the past 8 months. Her internet connection had been identified as a node in a sophisticated cybercrime network that was stealing personal information and financial data from victims nationwide. The revelation hit me like discovering that your annoying neighbor is actually a federal fugitive hiding in plain sight. I immediately accessed the classified case files through my DHS security clearance. What I found was a complex criminal operation that used suburban residential addresses as cover for industrial-scale identity theft. The perpetrators would establish seemingly legitimate residences in middle-class neighborhoods, then use those locations to coordinate cybercrime activities while blending into community life. Stephanie's address wasn't just flagged as suspicious. It was identified as a potential command center for financial crimes affecting hundreds of victims across multiple states. The federal monitoring system had been tracking digital communications from her location for months, building evidence for what would eventually become a major cybercrime prosecution. But here's where the situation became professionally complicated. I was living next door to a target of the same federal investigation I was helping to conduct. My pool demolition had accidentally placed me in direct conflict with someone who was already under federal surveillance for crimes related to my professional expertise. Every noise complaint she filed was being logged not just by city authorities, but by the same digital monitoring systems tracking her cybercrime activities. The irony was staggering. Stephanie thought she was harassing a regular homeowner into compliance with HOA regulations. In reality, she was documenting her own criminal activities for federal investigators by leaving digital evidence trails every time she filed an electronic complaint. I faced a choice that had no clear precedent in federal protocol manuals. I could report my discovery to my supervisors and potentially compromise an ongoing investigation, or I could continue my pool demolition while carefully documenting Stephanie's escalating harassment for eventual use as evidence. The decision was made for me when Stephanie's enforcement campaign took a turn that crossed the line from neighborhood dispute into potential federal crime. She began installing security cameras positioned to monitor my property, claiming they were necessary for documenting ongoing violations of community standards. But these weren't consumer-grade security devices. The equipment she was using showed characteristics of professional surveillance technology, including infrared capabilities and network connectivity that suggested remote monitoring capabilities. More concerning was the discovery that her camera system was accessing internet bandwidth through compromised residential connections throughout our neighborhood. She was essentially running an unauthorized surveillance network using stolen digital resources from our neighbors' internet accounts. That's when I realized Stephanie's aggressive HOA enforcement wasn't just about controlling neighborhood aesthetics. She was using her position as community authority to establish surveillance and control systems that protected her cybercrime operation from discovery. Every family she intimidated into compliance was another household that wouldn't question suspicious activities or investigate unusual digital signatures in their network connections. Her role as HOA president provided perfect cover for monitoring potential threats to her criminal enterprise. I called my supervisor at DHS, Agent Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in domestic cybercrime operations. Nathan, you're telling me you've been living next door to one of our primary investigation targets for 3 years? Sarah's voice carried the disbelief of someone trying to process an impossible coincidence. Sarah, it gets worse. She's been using HOA authority to establish surveillance systems and intimidate residents who might accidentally discover her operation. Her noise complaints against me aren't random harassment. They're designed to eliminate a federal employee who could potentially expose her activities. Nathan, this changes the entire scope of our investigation. If she's targeting federal personnel, we're looking at potential domestic terrorism charges in addition to the cybercrime violations. The conversation that followed redefined my understanding of the case I'd been working on. Stephanie's operation wasn't just stealing money from individual victims. It was systematically infiltrating suburban communities to establish protected bases for ongoing criminal activities. The federal investigation had identified 17 similar operations across multiple states, all using the same methodology: establish residence in middle-class neighborhoods, gain community authority through HOA or civic positions, then use that authority to protect cybercrime operations from law enforcement detection. But Sarah's next revelation was the one that made everything personal. Nathan, we've been tracking financial transactions from your neighbor's location that suggest she's been stealing from every household in your community. The HOA dues, maintenance fees, and special assessments have been systematically diverted into cryptocurrency accounts controlled by the criminal network. Every family in our neighborhood had been financially exploited for 3 years by someone they'd trusted with community leadership. The woman who lectured residents about property values and community standards had been stealing from them while using HOA authority to silence anyone who might discover her crimes. My pool demolition had accidentally triggered a confrontation with someone who had far more to lose than I'd ever imagined. Stephanie's escalating harassment wasn't about noise ordinances or community standards. It was about eliminating a federal cybersecurity analyst who represented an existential threat to a multi-million-dollar criminal operation. As I hung up with Sarah, I realized that my simple home improvement project had evolved into something that would either expose a nationwide cybercrime syndicate or put my family in danger from criminals who had already demonstrated sophisticated surveillance capabilities and complete disregard for legal boundaries. The noise complaints were just the beginning. What happened next would determine whether a federal cybersecurity analyst could outwit a cybercrime mastermind who'd been hiding in plain sight for 3 years, or whether Stephanie Crawford's operation was sophisticated enough to eliminate threats to her suburban criminal empire. But what Stephanie didn't know was that every electronic complaint she'd filed had been creating a digital evidence trail that federal investigators could use to map her entire criminal network. And tomorrow morning, her final noise complaint would accidentally provide the probable cause needed for a federal raid that would bring down one of the largest identity theft operations in cybercrime history. The final noise complaint came at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. My contractor had finished work 6 hours earlier, but Stephanie filed an emergency violation claiming ongoing construction noise disturbance requiring immediate municipal intervention. What she didn't know was that her electronic submission had just provided federal investigators with the final piece of evidence needed for a pre-dawn raid. Agent Sarah Mitchell called me at midnight with news that would change everything. Nathan, that last complaint your neighbor filed contained metadata, showing she accessed restricted municipal databases using stolen administrative credentials. We now have probable cause for domestic terrorism charges. The raid happens at 6 a.m. I spent the next 5 hours watching through my bedroom window as federal vehicles positioned themselves throughout our neighborhood. FBI cybercrime specialists, DHS digital forensics teams, and local law enforcement coordinated what would become the largest suburban cybercrime raid in federal history. The operation was a masterclass in federal coordination. Agent Mitchell explained the tactical approach as unmarked vehicles established perimeter control, while technical specialists prepared to isolate Stephanie's digital infrastructure. Nathan, we need to prevent any data destruction while securing evidence that could implicate criminal networks across multiple states. Watching federal agents implement cybersecurity protocols I'd helped develop was surreal. The same digital forensics procedures I used to track international cybercrime were being deployed against my HOA president's suburban criminal enterprise. Mobile command units established encrypted communication networks, while digital specialists prepared to mirror Stephanie's computer systems before she could detect the raid. At exactly 6 a.m., 12 FBI agents in tactical gear surrounded Stephanie's house, while cybercrime specialists prepared to secure what they expected to be an industrial-scale identity theft operation. The irony wasn't lost on me that my pool demolition had accidentally triggered the federal takedown of a criminal enterprise that had been hiding in plain sight for 3 years. Agent Mitchell approached my front door as the tactical team prepared for entry. "Nathan, we're going to need you to document everything from your position as both federal analyst and victim. This operation extends far beyond what we initially suspected. What happened next exceeded every expectation federal investigators had developed during 8 months of careful surveillance." The tactical team's entry revealed that Stephanie's basement had been converted into a sophisticated cybercrime command center, professional-grade computer servers, multiple internet connections, and digital monitoring equipment filled what should have been a suburban family room. The setup rivaled anything I'd seen in federal cybersecurity operations. The technical infrastructure was staggering. Digital forensics specialists discovered 17 different computer systems, each configured for specific criminal functions. Identity harvesting servers collected personal information from compromised databases. Financial processing systems coordinated fraudulent transactions across multiple banking networks. Communication servers managed encrypted conversations with criminal associates in 12 different states. Agent Mitchell walked me through the evidence as specialists documented each system. "Nathan, look at this setup. She's got redundant internet connections through 4 different providers, satellite backup communications, and industrial-grade data storage. This isn't amateur hour. She was running a cybercrime corporation from her basement. The surveillance capabilities were equally sophisticated. Hidden cameras throughout her house monitored every approach route, while digital monitoring systems tracked neighborhood internet traffic. She'd been conducting comprehensive surveillance of our entire community, while residents thought she was simply an overly attentive HOA president. But the real discovery was in the scope of her criminal network. Digital forensic specialists found evidence of active connections to cybercrime operations in 12 different states, coordinated financial theft affecting over 800 victims, and systematic infiltration of HOA organizations nationwide. Jesus Christ. "Nathan," Agent Mitchell said as she reviewed the initial evidence inventory, "your neighbor wasn't just stealing identities. She was running a cybercrime syndicate that was targeting entire communities through HOA infiltration. The servers contained detailed profiles of residents from 17 different neighborhoods, complete with financial information, personal data, and vulnerability assessments. Stephanie had been systematically cataloging families based on their potential value as identity theft targets while using HOA authority to protect her operation from discovery. Our community's financial records revealed the full scope of her local operations. Every HOA fee, special assessment, and maintenance charge had been systematically diverted into cryptocurrency accounts controlled by her criminal network. $340,000 in community funds had been stolen over 3 years while residents trusted her with their financial security. As federal agents continued documenting evidence, neighbors began gathering outside to witness what appeared to be a military operation in their suburban paradise. The sight of FBI cybercrime trucks and digital forensics equipment made it clear that this wasn't a routine law enforcement action. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a DHS security analyst I'd worked with on previous cases, to arrive to coordinate the digital evidence processing. "Nathan, the preliminary analysis shows your neighbor was accessing federal databases through compromised government credentials. This isn't just identity theft, it's a potential national security breach. The investigation revealed that Stephanie had been using stolen federal employee credentials to access classified information systems, including databases related to my own cybersecurity work. Her harassment campaign against me wasn't just about eliminating a threat to her criminal operation, it was about gaining access to federal cybersecurity protocols that could be sold to foreign actors. She was trying to steal classified information through a federal employee who happened to live next door." Jennifer explained, "Your pool demolition accidentally prevented what could have been a significant national security compromise. Detective Mike Torres from the local police department coordinated with federal investigators to manage the community impact. Residents needed to understand that they'd been living next to a sophisticated criminal operation while trusting their community leadership to someone who'd been systematically exploiting them. By 10 a.m., Stephanie Crawford was in federal custody facing charges that included identity theft, financial fraud, cybercrime conspiracy, and potential domestic terrorism. Her carefully constructed suburban cover had collapsed under the weight of digital evidence that federal investigators had been collecting for months. The community meeting that afternoon was unlike anything our neighborhood had ever experienced. Federal agents explained how residents had been victimized by someone they'd trusted with HOA leadership, while cybersecurity specialists described the scope of the criminal operation that had been conducted from their suburban community. The impact on individual families was devastating and far-reaching. Agent Mitchell presented the preliminary victim analysis to assembled residents, explaining how Stephanie had systematically exploited her access to personal information collected through HOA activities, property records, emergency contact information, and financial documents submitted for community purposes had all been weaponized for identity theft. Maria Santos, a single mother who'd been struggling with unexplained financial difficulties, broke down when she learned that her identity had been stolen and used to open 17 different credit accounts. "I thought I was just bad with money," she sobbed. "I never imagined someone was actively destroying my credit while pretending to protect our community." Her story was heartbreaking but not unique. Digital forensics had revealed that Stephanie maintained detailed victim profiles for every household in the neighborhood. She'd tracked family schedules, income source, and financial vulnerabilities, while presenting herself as a concerned community leader. Tom Rivera, an elderly veteran on a fixed income, discovered that his Social Security information had been sold to criminal networks in 6 different states. "She helped me file my HOA paperwork," he said with disbelief. She had access to everything while pretending to care about our neighborhood. The Hendersons, a young couple with twin toddlers, learned that their identities had been used to establish fake businesses that laundered money for drug trafficking operations. "We trusted her to organize our neighborhood watch," Jennifer Henderson said through tears. "She was using that position to catalog when our houses were empty, so her criminal associates could conduct surveillance." Dr. Patricia Williams, a recently retired physician, had been targeted because of her excellent credit rating and substantial retirement savings. "Stephanie convinced me to consolidate my HOA documents with hers for community efficiency," she explained. "She used that access to steal my banking information and establish lines of credit worth over $200. Ling. Family after family learned that their personal information had been compromised, their financial accounts accessed, and their trust exploited by someone who'd positioned herself as a community protector. The psychological impact was devastating, but the federal response was comprehensive and immediate. The FBI's Victim Services Division provided identity restoration support for every affected resident. Federal financial crime specialists helped families recover stolen funds and repair damaged credit profiles. Most importantly, DHS cybersecurity experts implemented monitoring systems to prevent future digital exploitation. Stephanie's federal prosecution moved with the efficiency that major cybercrime cases demand. Evidence seized during the raid revealed connections to criminal networks in 12 states. Financial theft, totaling $4.3 million, and systematic exploitation of community leadership positions to protect ongoing criminal activities. The federal case was unprecedented in its scope and complexity. U.S. Attorney Patricia Morrison personally oversaw the prosecution, recognizing that Stephanie's operation represented a new evolution in organized cybercrime. This defendant didn't just steal from individuals, Morrison explained during a press conference. She systematically infiltrated communities and corrupted institutions designed to protect residents. The evidence was overwhelming and technically sophisticated. Digital forensic specialists had recovered over 8 terabytes of data, including detailed victim profiles, financial transaction records, and encrypted communications with criminal associates across multiple continents. The case required testimony from cybersecurity experts, financial crime specialists, and victims from 17 different states. Stephanie's defense team attempted to portray her as a victim of sophisticated criminal manipulation. claiming she'd been coerced into providing technical support for operations she didn't understand. But digital evidence showed she'd been the operational mastermind, recruiting criminal associates and coordinating activities while maintaining her suburban cover identity. During her federal sentencing hearing, Stephanie attempted to minimize her role by claiming she was merely a financial consultant who'd gotten involved with questionable business partners. But digital forensics evidence showed she'd been the mastermind behind the entire operation, recruiting and coordinating cybercriminals while using suburban communities as protected bases for their activities. Mrs. Crawford, Federal Judge Patricia Edwards said during sentencing, "You systematically betrayed the trust of communities that elected you to protect them? Your exploitation of neighborhood leadership positions represents a particularly heinous form of domestic terrorism." Stephanie received a 15-year federal sentence with no possibility of parole. Additional civil penalties required her to pay $4.3 million in restitution to victims, while asset forfeiture recovered $1 million in criminal proceeds that would be distributed to affected communities. But the real victory was in the systemic changes. Her prosecution triggered. The Department of Homeland Security implemented new protocols requiring background checks for HOA leadership positions, while federal legislation mandated financial oversight for community organizations managing more than $50 in annual revenue. My role in the investigation earned recognition that transformed my career trajectory. DHS promoted me to senior cybersecurity analyst with responsibilities for developing community protection protocols. The Nathan Cross Digital Safety Standards became federal requirements for detecting financial crimes in residential communities. 6 months later, I was standing in my completed home office where my pool used to be, reviewing cybersecurity protocols that would protect millions of families from the type of exploitation our neighborhood had endured. The secure workspace that had motivated my pool demolition had become the foundation for developing protection systems that would prevent future Stephanie Crawfords from infiltrating communities nationwide. The transformation was remarkable. My home office now served as a regional cybersecurity coordination center, equipped with federal communication systems and classified databases that allowed me to monitor emerging threats to residential communities. The irony that my pool removal had created the perfect workspace for protecting families from the exact type of criminal I'd accidentally exposed wasn't lost on anyone involved in the case. Agent Mitchell visited during the first anniversary of the raid to review the ongoing impact of our investigation. "Nathan, your accidental discovery led to arrests in 17 states and recovery of over $8 million in stolen funds. You've probably prevented thousands of families from becoming victims of similar operations." The ripple effects continued expanding. Federal investigators had identified and dismantled similar operations in Arizona, Colorado, and North Carolina, all using identical methodologies pioneered by Stephanie's criminal network. The prosecutions had recovered over $23 million in stolen funds while preventing estimated future losses exceeding $100 million. The professional recognition was meaningful, but the community healing was more important. Our neighborhood had implemented transparent financial management, democratic HOA leadership, and digital security protocols that made future exploitation virtually impossible. Dr. Walsh established the Cross Community Protection Initiative, providing cybersecurity training for residential communities nationwide. Your case proved that sophisticated criminals are targeting suburban neighborhoods specifically because residents don't expect to encounter organized crime in their communities, she explained. The initiative trained community leaders to recognize digital fraud indicators, implemented financial oversight requirements for HOA organizations, and created federal reporting systems for suspicious authority figures who showed signs of criminal exploitation. 2 years after my pool demolition, I received a letter from the National Cybersecurity Alliance recognizing my contribution to community digital protection. But the most meaningful recognition came from families in our neighborhood who'd recovered their financial security and learned to protect themselves from future exploitation. "You gave us our lives back," Maria Santos said during a community appreciation ceremony. "But more than that, you taught us how to protect ourselves, so this can never happen again." The Federal Trade Commission established the Stephanie Crawford Memorial Database, a system for tracking suspicious community leaders and detecting patterns of residential financial exploitation. The ironic naming honored the lessons learned from someone who'd used community trust to facilitate systematic criminal operations. standing in my secure home office, surrounded by classified cybersecurity equipment and federal case files. I realized that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when criminals make the mistake of targeting someone with the exact skills needed to expose their operations. Stephanie Crawford had thought she was eliminating a threat to her cybercrime syndicate by harassing a federal employee into moving away. Instead, she'd drawn the attention of a cybersecurity specialist whose professional expertise was perfectly suited to unraveling the digital evidence of her criminal network. My pool demolition had accidentally triggered the federal investigation that brought down one of the largest suburban cybercrime operations in American history. The noise complaints that were supposed to silence me had actually provided the digital evidence trail that federal investigators needed to map her entire criminal enterprise. Sometimes when someone tries to control your noise, they're actually trying to silence the truth. And sometimes, the person making the most complaints is the one with the most to hide from federal investigators. The cybersecurity monitoring systems I'd helped develop continued protecting communities nationwide, ensuring that future criminals couldn't use suburban trust to facilitate organized crime because community safety requires vigilance. And sometimes it takes a federal cybersecurity analyst with a demolished pool to expose the sophisticated criminals hiding behind HOA authority. The investigation that started with noise complaints about my construction project had become the foundation for protecting millions of families from digital exploitation disguised as community leadership. And that was a legacy worth every noise complaint Stephanie Crawford had ever filed.